One of the things that made this a fun project to start on was the fact that this was in my neighborhood and it was with people that I really cared about and lived with, all year round. The homeowners really got it. They recognized that we were living in a really unbalanced situation here in regards to fuels buildup, and knew that while they couldn't have any control over what was happening on state lands or federal lands, they could control what was happening on their own properties. And so yes, they were very willing and very ready to do something about it. And then there was a fire. I think when you prepare and do defensible space work the way that the residents here in Deer Creek did, you're preparing for that worst case scenario, but you don't necessarily expect it to happen. And when the fire at Deer Creek did happen, I think initially in the first few hours when people were trying to evacuate and leave, there was shock and disbelief and, walking away from our homes and our structures, that was the thought, will these places be here when we get back? You want to believe that all of the work that you've done is going to create that scenario that you're going to come back and find everything intact, but you just don't know. And it was really a very tough couple of hours for a lot of us here. There was really no time to prepare for anything. There was no time to pre-set sprinklers. There was no time to set up pumps. There was no time to do the normal structure protection things that you would see, like in the area of Dixie, where they wrapped homes.
I started about 5 days before the fire started, removing all the fuels from around the house, all the fuels from around the barn, the trailers, and the other outlying sheds. And at the same time thinking, fire'd never get here. It did. On July 20th, the fire reached the top of the ridge and ran down here about 2 miles in about 25 minutes, driven by intense downhill winds, high heat, and incredibly low humidities. Regardless of what I had thought, I never expected a fire to come that fast with that much intensity. The heat from the fire itself was inconsequential as far as ignition of even dry cedar shakes. The biggest risk was embers. Embers getting in cracks between the shakes, embers getting in the porch. So what I'd done was I had put water troughs at 2 corners of the house. I had put buckets there, and what I was thinking was a couple things. One, I might lose my power. The second is I might lose the water from my regular water system. And I knew that most of the time, all it takes is a cup to a cup and a half of water to put out that one ember, which could take your house down.
It's just like hail coming down from the sky. It was raining embers, and we have a metal roof on the house for that reason, and a metal roof on the shop for that reason, and then there's cement around the house.
I think, in the span of probably an hour to an hour and a half after the fire went over the ridge, where it overtook and consumed pretty much every stick, every blade of grass in Deer Creek. So the normal preparations that you would see, it couldn't happen here. The only way that we knew that we could be prepared was the pre-work that happened.
I really think I got the worst case scenario. Only Yellowstone, in terms of the devastation of the trees, was anything to compare with this that I've seen. Most of the forest fire fighters that I've talked with that have come back up here to do hydrology work or whatever say this is about as severe as any they've ever seen. A lot of us that haven't been through an experience like this tend to think that there are this inexhaustible group of resources that can be here on a moment's notice, and believe me, that's not the case. And we were told by Forest Service personnel they just didn't have the resources available. And when I called 911 to see if I could get any tanker or any help in, they said they just didn't have anybody available to support my request. And the fire moved with such ferocity that it's a good thing there were no people up here who did not have the space that I had. You either had to have a large, wide open space in the road, or you had to have the lawn area or a well-protected house such as I had here to survive. One thing that I observed from being on site during the fire was that the winds became very erratic, very unpredictable. They would be out of the south, and initially they were out of the southwest at about 15 miles an hour and very uniform. But then when the fire surrounded me, they became very erratic. There would be gusts of up to 50 or 60 miles an hour blowing embers every which direction. And then at one point the wind shifted and came out of the east, and another point there was a gust out of the north. So it was difficult to know where the next gust was coming from.
After the fire went by, there was 3 more days of working with that. Down in the gully below the barns were stump holes, pitch stumps, and things like that, which kept burning despite the fact that we put a lot of water on them. And one of those crept up to within probably 3.5 inches of the barn in a single line of dry grass about this wide, one of the lines that I had missed. All it takes in reality is paying attention to small details. How do you remove all the fuels from your house? Do you have a safe place to stay? And how do you plan so that you can effectively stay, if that's your choice, and deal with the oncoming fire as easily as possible?
The outcome was that while a lot of timber and grasslands will be forever changed, those spaces that we were dwelling in, our homes, our yards, everything that was in that vicinity where we did fuels treatment, all of that was intact. It was fairly amazing to drive up to some of the residents within an hour of the fire going through and seeing, these entirely green islands where homes were still standing.
The reason my house didn't burn is because of the defensible fire plan that was in. It was done 3 years ago. We removed all the brush, trimmed the trees up, and had a bare space around with a sprinkler system and the green belt around the house. And as little as I know about fires and how to prevent them, it was a wonderful plan.
Mike was a really unique story because he had actually done some logging in the past, but he had been reticent to do any fuels reduction work around his home, at least within that 100 feet area. And so going in and talking to him about, well, maybe you should think about what happens if we do get a huge wildfire event, and what would happen if, those trees that are within that first 100 feet catch on fire. What's going to be the end result? And after thinking about, the potential losses to his home and to to his outbuildings, it changed his mind.
It saved me a couple $1 million, and I still have a house to come home to. The only thing that I missed in the fire plan was the fact that I was storing wood behind the shop, right up against the shop. Had I not had 2x4s and 2x6s stacked out in back of the shop here, I wouldn't have had any damage at all. The reason that the 2x4s caught on fire was the fact that the embers were blowing down from the trees and up the hill, and the wind coming down the canyon carried the hot embers and landed on the 2x4s, which ignited them, and then the fire transferred inside of the shop to the plywood.
The biggest thing to take away from this is if it can happen in Deer Creek, it can happen anywhere, and it doesn't matter what your fuel type is or what topography you're in, fire's going to happen. And so I think the best thing that you can do is think about what resources are out there that might help you mitigate for the factors that fuel a fire. And to that end, there are resources with both the federal government and your local state agencies, and even at the local level with your volunteer fire departments that can probably come in and help you determine what kinds of treatments you need to do around your homes. I think it's a matter of reaching out to those entities and using them as a jumping off point to get that work going. And once you start there, there's always going to be something available as far as funds, as far as available help that will probably get that facilitated for you. If it happened for us, it can happen almost in any community that's out there that's in a wildland-urban interface situation.